welcome back to another episode of Learn to Play Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not totally sure what to call this one. We're basically going to be talking about negation versus destruction. This video is sponsored by my recent locals experience where I made Wiccat. I said Wiccat effect, detach 2 for cost, and then I got Ghost Ogred. And I even read the card, but I went back to my pre-Yu-Gi-Oh! Self, the self who would play Magic the Gathering, the self who internalized that if a card is not on field at resolution, it doesn't resolve. And that wasn't true. Ghost Ogre did not negate my effect. But there are some cards that if they get destroyed, they do not resolve. We're talking about how do you know if something is negated versus destroyed, and when, if something is destroyed, is it actually negated? And we're gonna walk through some hand traps, some regular traps, a spell. I created a collection of cards that I think you should know what they do and what they do for the game if someone uses them against you. I also need to know this because I didn't know Ghost Ogre didn't negate. And in the heat of battle, despite reading the card, I didn't. Anyway, let's get into it. Okay, first thing we need to review is cost versus effect. So if you are trying to negate the effect of a card, it has to be separate from what the cost is. So for example, Witchcrafter Jenny says you can banish this card and one Witchcrafter spell from your graveyard, semicolon. If you remember, everything before the semicolon is cost, meaning you cannot ghost spell Witchcrafter Jenny. So if we look at ghost spell, it says when a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects. And this says banish a card from the graveyard. Banishing the card from the graveyard for Witchcrafter Jenny is not the effect of the card. The effect of Witchcrafter Jenny is this effect becomes that spell's effect when this card is activated. So if you Witchcrafter Jenny and you banish a Ved Lacrima of Light, then the effect becomes to special summon from deck. That is the effect that you're interacting with. Okay, another thing we need to talk about before we can actually get into the hand trap, negate, destroy examples is that continuous spells and field spells need to stay on the field in order to resolve their effects. So basically, if your continuous spell or field spell gets popped, gets returned to hand, gets put to banishment, if it leaves the field, it is not negated, but the effect resolves without effect. Okay, so let me give you an example. Your opponent plays Elf Note Welcome Home. It's also important to note that there's a difference between, like with Elf Note Welcome Home, there's an activation when it goes on the field. And this says you can only use this effect once per turn. If you return this card to their hand before they activate the effect, if they're like, okay, Elf Note, welcome home, and then you chain something to pop it, they can just do it again. So you want to make sure that they are using the effect, right? Because it says you can only use the effect once per turn. This is why we say it's not negated, it just resolves without effect, because that's important because you can only do it once per turn. So Elf Note, welcome home, they can do as much as they want before they activate the effect of Elf Note Welcome Home. On activation of the effect, if you chain anything that takes Elf Note Welcome Home off the field, you're not actually negating it. You're removing it from the field. The card resolves without effect. So it basically pseudo negates it. They're not going to get to special summon an Elf Note monster. It's important to note, though, that with some continuous spells like A Case for Canine, it says when this card is activated. This also happens with field spells like Fairy Tale Ball, when this card is activated, Malice and Underground, when this card is activated. What this means is the effect and activation are happening at the same time. So with Elf Note Welcome Home, or even with Vidolia, notice doesn't have that when this card is activated. You're placing it, so there's an activation window of just placing it. No effect is happening. You are literally just putting the card on your field. You are activating the continuous spell, activating the field spell, just meaning like it's there, it's on the field, it's ready for use whenever you want to use it later. These are different than cards like A Case for Canine that when this card is activated. So immediately upon activation, the effect is also happening. This has the same rule though, okay? That when this card is activated, if for some reason this card does not remain on the field, if Fairy Tale Ball, when this card is activated, does not remain on the field at resolution, if Underground does not remain on the field at resolution, then the effect does not go through. Another important thing about when this card is activated, like specifically field spells, if the activation is negated, the card is destroyed. So Malice and Underground, If this gets ghost spelled, it is ghost spellable because you can banish one malice card from your hand, deck, or graveyard. If this gets ghost spelled, meaning you negate the activation, it gets destroyed. So that's important. But because then you no longer have the effect of, while you control a Malice Link monster, your opponent's monsters can only target Malice Link monsters. So it will get destroyed if the activation is negated. On the plus side, when it says you can only activate one Malice and Underground per turn, if the activation is negated, you can activate another one, right? So that's different from, again, you can only use the effect. If you use the effect and then this gets bounced, you did use the effect. It just resolved without anything happening. Versus like using the effect, and I'll make a whole video about like when you can use the effect again, if it was, and when you can't. Like that's kind of a separate conversation. But it is important to note that when we're talking hand traps, negations, destructions, continuous spells, field spells, and I believe pendulum monsters that are being used in the spell trap zone and equip spells need to be on the field for them to resolve. So your opponent might not negate them directly, but by destroying them or bouncing them back to hand, basically by getting them off of the field, they resolve without effect. Okay, I think that's all we need to know. Cost, stuff that has to stay on the field in order for it to resolve. And now we're just gonna look at some examples of some common hand traps or just destruction methods, and to look at if they negate activation, if they negate effect, or if they just destroy, and what that means. Okay, we're gonna start with what I think is like the most common hand trap that you're gonna be up against is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So this is a when hand trap, meaning it has to be the very next thing in the chain. Again, I've made videos about this. If you wanna look at like videos about the chain, highly recommend those as well. When a card or effect is activated, that includes any of these effects. So again, we are looking at the effect, not the cost. So the effect after the semicolon, add a card from deck to hand, special summon from deck, send a card from deck to graveyard. You can negate that effect. So that effect is negated, meaning the card, especially if we're talking monster cards, like the monster card will stay on the field. So let's say, for example, we can use my Wiccat example again. So for example, chain 1 Wiccat, I detach as cost. The effect of Wiccat says, send fairy tale cards from your deck to the graveyard equal to the number detached. You can Ash Blossom this, meaning, because I'm trying to send a card from the graveyard, meaning Wiccat will remain on the field, but her effect is negated. And because you can only use each effect once per turn, I am not able to use her effect again later, and I've essentially been turned off from using Wiccat for the remainder of the turn. Ghost Ogre destroys, it does not negate. So when a monster on the field activates its effect, or when a spell trap that is already face up on the field activates its effect, quick effect. You can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, destroy that card. Okay, Ghost Ogre inherently does not negate, but it totally matters what gets destroyed. So example A, I have Fairy Tale Wiccat. Activate effect of Wiccat, detach as cost to send 2. You chain Ghost Ogre because I have activated a card or effect. You send it and you destroy my Wiccat. Wiccat does not have to remain on the field in order to resolve. So when we do the chain, right, if this is chain 1 Wiccat, chain 2 Ghost Ogre is going to destroy the Wiccat. So Wiccat goes to grave. And then Wiccat's effect will resolve because monster cards do not need to remain on the field at resolution for the most part. There's probably some example out there that contradicts this, but let's say you do the effect of Welcome Home. Okay, activate the effect of Welcome Home, right? So this is, again, already face up on the field because it has 2 different activation windows. This is different from a case for Canine that the effect is already happening at activation. That's why we needed to cover this. So Elf Note Welcome Home, you placed it, your opponent activated it by just putting it on the field. They do a bunch of stuff, and then they go, okay, activate the effect of Elf Note Welcome Home, and you chain Ghost Ogre. That card was already face up on the field. and it has now activated its effect. You are going to destroy Elf Note Welcome Home, and Elf Note Welcome Home will now resolve without effect because continuous spells, field spells, pendulum monsters in the spell trap zone, and equip spells or equip cards need to stay on field to resolve. So this is where it gets kind of tricky because when I was playing Fairy Tale, my Wiccat got Ghost Ogred and I didn't resolve the effect because I still get confused over what resolves when it is no longer on field and what doesn't. A monster card getting destroyed, the effect will still resolve. The effect has to be directly negated in order for it to not resolve. However, if you Ghost Ogre Elf Note Welcome Home, it will not resolve because game mechanic, it has to be on the field at resolution. Another common one is Ghost Bell. When a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, you can discard this card, negate the activation. So if a card says it can only be activated once per turn, then you can do another one. So let's say you Ghost Bell Malice and Underground. You have effectively negated the activation, meaning I can activate another one later. But if you Ghost Spell, say, Snow, you did negate the activation. I can do it again because this doesn't say you can only use it once per turn. So let me try to find an example. Snow is kind of a bad example because that's what makes it busted. It's not once per turn. Most cards, though, when you negate the activation, unless it says specifically you can only activate this card once per turn, most cards say you can only use the effect once per turn, meaning you did try to use the effect. But the effect resolved, negated. So again, Ghost Spell is a tricky one because there's a lot of cards that as part of their cost mechanic do these things. Banish a card from graveyard, or mainly that one. The banish card from graveyard is a big thing that is used in cost in Yu-Gi-Oh! You cannot Ghost Spell the cost of a card. So you cannot Ghost Spell, again, for example, Jenny, because that's cost. But you can Ghost Spell the effect of a card that is adding from graveyard, special summoning a monster from graveyard, or banishing a card from the graveyard. Okay, so here's an example of a Ghost Spellable card. Let's say Chain 1. You can only use each effect of the following effects of Lollipop Yummy Way once per turn. So let's say if this card is synchro summoned, you can special summon 2 yummy monsters from your graveyard but negate their effects. So Chain 1, Lollipop, because it is if this card is synchro summoned as turn player, you'll get prio. So you'll say turn 1 or Chain 1, Lollipop Yummy Way to special summon 2 monsters from graveyard. Chain 2, Ghost Spell. You are negating the activation, but because this card says you can only use, you did use it. You attempted to use it, and then it resolved, negated. So you don't get to do that. You could quick effect return this card and special summon 2 anyway, though. So both parts of this effect are Ghost Bellable, but because this is a quick effect, it can also still be chained, and then you can only Ghost Spell once per turn. So you'd be out of luck in that situation. Honorary mention to MST. MST does not negate. I think, and I'm new to the game, so you can tell me if I'm wrong about where this misconception that MST negates comes from. It's because the spells have to stay on field to resolve. So again, MST says target 1 spell trap on the field, destroy that target. So if you are, again, trying to use, let's say, Elf Note Welcome Home, and you go to, and you say, okay, activate, meaning it's just placed, right? And then effect of Elf Note Welcome Home, and your opponent chains MST, they're not negating Elf Note Welcome Home. But Elf Note Welcome Home as a continuous spell has to remain on the field to resolve. So by destroying the target, it resolves negated. But MST does not negate. It literally just destroys. But remember, with game mechanics, there's certain cards like continuous spells that have to stay on the field at their resolution in order to resolve properly, just to resolve with effect. So if MST is chained to Elf Note Welcome Home's effect, then we resolve backwards. MST is going to pop. Elf Note Welcome Home. Elf Note Welcome Home resolves without effect because it is no longer on the field. So this is important because if you as turn player activate Metamorphosis, and then MST gets chained to Metamorphosis, cool. Metamorphosis is still resolving because MST does not negate, and normal spell cards, they're going to go to the graveyard. They don't need to remain on field for their resolution. I feel like this is a popular Genesis example, so I wanted to throw it in here. DD Crow says, quick effect, you can discard this card at the graveyard, target one card in an opponent's graveyard, banish that target. Again, if your opponent is activating a card effect in the graveyard, that does not have to do with summoning itself back from the graveyard. So for example, if you chain DD Crow to my activation of Snow. So Snow is going to banish 7 cards from hand, field, or graveyard as cost. So I activate Snow, I banish my 7. I'm attempting to special summon this card. If you then chain DD Crow to banish it, you didn't negate the effect, but because Snow's going to move to banishment, it's not going to be able to special summon itself from banishment because it's now moved locations. So again, things like that where I personally get confused over is it negated? It's resolving without effect. Yu-Gi-Oh has a thing known as resolving without effect because if something moves locations, it can't resolve the way it's supposed to resolve anymore. So DD Crow does not negate anything. It just banishes. So this is different from, say, Called by the Grave. So if we look at Called by the Grave, it says target one monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it. And if you do, until the end of the next turn, its effects are negated. So DD Crow just banishes. Called by does negate. So if you chain Called by to an Ash Blossom, you are negating the Ash Blossom. You're also banishing it. If you chain Called by the Grave to Snow, you are negating it and banishing it. But DD Crow, the Snow will not be able to summon itself because, so the way Yu-Gi-Oh views cards is the version of Snow that activated itself in Grave is no longer the same version that got banished off the DD Crow. It is now considered a new copy. That's for everywhere. The Snow on the field is different from the Snow in the Grave, is different from the Snow in banishment, is different from the Snow in deck. They're considered new copies, which is why I've also made videos about this. You can only hard once per turn versus soft once per turns. A bunch of plugs for the Learn to Play series in this one. So because DD Crow is going to move Snow, the Snow that activated her effect in Grave, to banishment, she can't summon herself because that's not the same Snow that activated her effect. So DD Crow didn't negate the Snow, but Snow's not going to resolve without effect. Versus Called by would just hard negate. The Snow would get banished. Its effects would be negated. Another little tip is when you are negating effects, so if you're using Effect Failure to negate the effect of a monster or Imperm to negate the effect of a monster, you want to wait until your opponent has activated the effect because so many cards say your opponent can only use the effect of this card once per turn. And if it resolves negated or resolves without effect, that is still using. So you have effectively shut them off from doing that. So for example, if you Effect Veiler a Dormouse before I've used the Ignition effect, just how we talked about how a new copy, the same card, just moving locations. Let's say I banish that Dormouse and I resummon it. That new copy that left the field, went to banishment and came back to the field, I can now activate the effect because you negated the effect of that face-up monster until the end of this turn. I haven't attempted to even use the Ignition effect of Dormouse yet. So you normally want to wait until your opponent activates the effect and then you negate it because now you've also shut them off of being able to attempt to do it later, especially since most stuff is a once per turn. Okay, we're almost done with examples. If you have any more examples, please leave them in the comments, or if you want more videos like this, let me know. Happy to do that. But my last few examples is Nib and then the Dominus cards. So remember, chains resolve backwards. So Nib is going to tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible. So this does not negate. So if I use the effect of Wiccat, which I don't know if I see, oh, there it is. Let's say I use the effect of Wiccat and then Nib gets chained. So what's going to end up happening is we resolve backwards. So Nib is going to destroy everything, and then Wicket will resolve. So nib does not negate, it just destroys. But it is important to note that the way that the chain resolves is, let's say you chain something to special afterwards. You're like, oh, but I don't want to lose all my monsters. Anything that gets chained after nib as a monster is going to get destroyed by nib because you'll special summon it. Nib will resolve, destroying it. And then whatever you, like if you activated an effect to search, or then if you had activated an effect to special, that will resolve as if that was chain 1 and nib was chain 2. So nib is another example of something that destroys monsters. It does not negate monsters. And our last examples, I just want to go over the Dominus cards. So Dominus Impulse says when a card or effect that includes an effect that special summons, negate that effect. And if you have a trap in your graveyard, destroy that card. So this is normally that you are either activating, this works for if you're activating a card in hand to special summon. Remember, you know a card activates if it has a semicolon. Elf Note Lucina doesn't activate. Backup Adagnister does activate. So you can't impulse the Lucina. You can impulse the Backup Adagnister. So this is going to negate and destroy. Dominus Purge, when a card or effect is activated that includes an effect that adds a card from deck to hand, negate the effect, and again, destroy the card. So this negates and destroys. Spark is great because it will banish, but it does not negate. Okay, so Dominus Impulse, negate, destroy. Dominus Purge, negate, destroy. Dominus Spark says, during the turn in which your opponent has activated a monster effect in hand or graveyard, you can activate this card from hand. Target one monster your opponent controls, banish it. Banishing is not negation. So if you chain Spark on my Wicket, I still get to resolve Wicket because you did not negate it, you just banished it. Spiral is another one that says target one monster your opponent controls, return it to the hand or extra deck. And then if you have no traps in your graveyard or your opponent can special summon one monster. Same thing here, if you have no traps in graveyard, your opponent can special summon. Same thing, if I activate the effect of Wicket and then you spiral, it will return the Wicket to extra deck. It still resolves because you haven't negated it. So Impulse and Purge, they negate and they destroy. Spark just banishes. It does not negate. Your monster effect will still go through. Spiral does not negate. Your monster effect will still go through. It'll just get bounced to your hand. But remember, there are certain cards, continuous spells, field spells, and I believe equip spells and pendulum monsters that are being used as in the pendulum zones. They have to remain there. But pendulum monsters used in the spell trap zone aren't considered monsters, so you can't spiral them. It gets confusing, okay? It gets confusing. I like to cut myself some slack for my ghost ogre mistake at my locals. Thank you to everyone that pointed it out, though, because it inspired me to make this video. And I often make these videos to also help me because your girl needs a reminder of all this stuff because it can be a lot. If you have more examples, please leave them in the comments. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments. If you want me to see more videos of this, if you want to do like where there's very specific hand traps, even if it's just one hand trap that you want me to make like a more extended video about, please let me know. The gist of this is destruction does not equal negation. Ever. Even if a continuous spell is destroyed, it resolves without effect. It was not negated. So next time you go to activate Wicket and it gets destroyed, make sure you still do the effect because it wasn't negated. It was just destroyed. Okay, I hope this was helpful. As always, feedback is welcome, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. The baby's sleeping. I've kind of been liking doing my little overlays in order to not bug him too much. There's the baby. He's making memes, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.